No,
Or
it
we
doesn't.
can
Gives us an hour
edit
and a
that
half.
part off. So, hello and welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the KiloWatt Coaching Podcast. And today I've managed to get on a guest I've been, hoping to have on since I first started the podcast, and that's Peter Gascoigne, the strength coach currently working for Bahrain Victorious World Tour Pro Cycling Team. He's previously worked for British Cycling. He has a MSc in strength and conditioning, and he's currently got a broken what was it? An
Yeah, AC joint,
ACL joint from
acromioclavicular
from
joint from silly stuff on a gravel bikes, racing on the gravel bike. Yeah.
yeah. So how are you doing, Pete? And did I miss anything else major there from your professional background?
No, that was perfect. Yeah, thanks very much for having me on. Good to chat. We've chatted quite a lot, haven't we, through the last couple of years, on and off. So it'd be good to do some more
Yeah,
something a little bit more official. But yeah, doing well, thanks. And as we were just talking, the shoulder is a good time. It's like a good time to reflect and think differently because, as you know, like when you can train every day and go out and you've got something to get up and get out of the house for. When you don't have that because you've got a shoulder injury, I've had to wait 3 weeks for the surgery, which has been quite slow. You have a lot more time to think about stuff and reflect a little bit more about things, whether it's work or whatever else. So it's not all bad, it's good to be able to do that. So yeah, looking forward to this chat.
definitely. Yeah. It gives you some new perspective for when you go back to doing what you normally do, doesn't it?
Yeah.
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 So yeah, if we get into it then, the main topics for today. So the first question, so from having coached people myself, obviously, for a while now, some people are more skeptical about strength training. Some people really love it and they're onto it. And I guess a common kind of pushback I get is, if it's so important and and there's such strong scientific evidence for strength training being effective for improving cycling performance, why do you think? And yeah, if we could extend that into running and triathlon, why do you think so many high-level endurance athletes don't do any strength and conditioning despite this strong scientific evidence for it?
Yeah, before I answer that, we can pause this bit out. You can hear me okay? Because your sound just went crackly. My side, it's probably my laptop. When you charge it, it just does weird stuff. But you can hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you absolutely fine. Yeah, I haven't had any
Fine.
issues with
Okay.
hearing
Yeah.
you so far.
Yeah. Fine. Okay. No, you've gone good as well. It was just like it was going all a bit Dalek-y. Okay. So yeah. No. To answer your question, Minus. Yeah, I was thinking about this one a lot, and it's a good point. So I think from my side of things, there's like a kind of I think there's like a headline for this, which is I think it's less a scientific disagreement that probably athletes and coaches don't disagree what's being found and what's maybe coming out of practice. I think it's more of at a systems level. If you imagine like planning, training, day-to-day management, um, interactions, and even like logistics and having equipment and travel, like it's the optimization problem of actually, okay, we've got this tool we can use. We've seen from research and in various kind of studies that it's effective, even at the elite level, but it's optimizing it and investing in it, that I think therefore the small gains, if we're talking about elite level, the small gains almost get filtered out because there's too many potential barriers, there's too many potential risks, or even there's like culturally the sport's embedded in a certain way of behaving, or training, and also we're still in this era, and we will be for quite a long time, of like there's immediately visible gains that can be made in our sports now, with aerodynamics, with equipment and supplements, and even something like altitude. So yeah, there's a whole host of reasons, but I think it's a big topic, and I think probably a lot of it leans on like the systems or the kind of optimizing strength training to make it useful for the person, which requires experience, from a coach. And I would argue there's maybe not enough high quality S&C coaches working in endurance sports to be able to kind of bridge the gap and gain the trust, or at least give the information out in a way that then is usable for the athlete and reliable for the athlete and impacting for the athlete. And quite often we're still in that space that coaches are writing, sports coaches like the cycling coach, the triathlon coach, the running coach is probably writing the strength training plan. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. But again, if you were to go to a nutritionist and say, can you write me a cycling plan? Or to an S&C coach saying, can you write me a half marathon training plan? You're going to get something quite blunt back, So there's a lot of different aspects to that, I think, is in the practical world. I don't think it always lies in the effectiveness or the improvements that you see. But there's just like a whole host of arguments for why doing more of the sport and less of something less specific still wins at the moment. What do you think?
So I think what's quite evident is like the higher the training volume required to do the sport specific training, the less likely and the more difficult it is to fit in strength training. So if you look at like middle distance runners, on a whole, you'd say they do most of the top middle distance runners do at least some amount of strength training quite consistently, because a lot of them will only run like say 60 to 100 miles a week, which that's the only aerobic training they do most of the time, and doesn't take very long. Whereas you look at the other end of the spectrum and look at like long course triathletes who, probably the average amongst the top 20 is probably like 1,400 hours of aerobic training a year.
Yeah.
It's like, how do you then fit on top strength training on top of that? And of course, then there's also an argument of like, would they be better off doing 1,200 hours a year and doing strength training? And that's another question. But so I think, what you're saying about like the logistics of fitting it in, I think some endurance sports lend themselves to people having more time and easy access to facilities to do it. Like swimmers are very big on strength training because it kind of fits in a lot easier with these lot of like shorter sessions, which are in a swimming pool, which is usually next to a gym and, stuff like that. Whereas, for cyclists, they tend to like to just go out for a long ride and then just come home and then just sit in the bed the rest of the day. And then like just the inertia of getting out of the house to go and do another session is quite high. So I think, it's lots of factors like that. If I could put to you, I also think that it's probably the case that the shorter the event, the more potential benefit there also is to performance. So the potential benefit to performance to someone who's racing individual pursuit versus someone who's racing unbound gravel race is bigger. And that's another reason why athletes training for shorter events tend to prioritize strength and conditioning training more. I don't know if you'd agree with that, or if you think
Definitely.
there's as much benefit to long endurance events.
Yeah, no, I think for sure, like as you say, like the closer you go into those capacities that rely on the shorter systems or the faster systems, definitely, yeah, that's a huge part of it. But yeah, I suppose the topic of interest around some of those events like gravel, or guys who are guys and girls who ride classic races or are hard finishers after 4, 5, 6 hours on multiple day stages, like those are still interesting ones, because actually the point of difference in performance is that it is like, when you look at the event demands of that last 10 minutes or last 20 minutes of a race, last hour, are very similar to some of those like short events in their own right. And I think if you break down components of those defining moments, like if you're talking about cycling, watts per kilo points of difference, then actually, yeah, we're talking about guys who need to produce high amounts of force or power or resist force for longer periods than the next guy. And I think that was Unbound finished on a sprint. this year?
I've not still not had time to
I don't
watch how it ended this year,
possibly.
but I know it
Yeah,
was
I know.
finishing a sprint the year
But
before. Yeah,
yeah, I mean, I'd be surprised. I think we're going to see more of that in gravel racing. You know, it's just interesting where guys are, unless we're in hilly terrain, and gravel bikes are pretty competent, capable things at the moment. So unless they start making the courses, obviously, like finishing unbound is a huge thing. You know, it's not just about
yeah,
getting to the finishing line first, but UCI level gravel races. You know, I think most people are going to be finishing in a bunch soon enough, and we'll be seeing a lot of sprinting action. So unless they start changing the courses a lot, so yeah, it's an interesting topic. You kind of come full circle, and you go, well, do guys still need to have good strength qualities to be in that kind of selection for the top of a shorter finish, faster finish?
yeah.
Yeah,
So if we can so if we assume that it is effective then, and it's just a sort of lack of systems and like opportunity to do the strength training. When you came to Bahrain, what was the culture around S&C before you started? Was it similar to what it is now, and you just replaced a different strength coach, or were you kind of the first serious strength coach that started with the team?
yeah, yeah. I was the first S&C coach there. The culture of strength training or strength and conditioning training was that it was. I suppose I also arrived at the same time as some other coaches. So there's a group of five coaches,
Yeah,
and then there are a couple of other coaches also arriving.
yeah.
Um, and I think, you know, majority of the coaches, and if not all of them now, because we've even had changes in the last year, all of them now are in the same sort of belief around strength training. So it was quite an easy culture to kind of start working in, with the coaches certainly, and
What about the riders?
it was a blank canvas, you know, from a perspective of they didn't have any equipment. You know, we would go
Yeah.
to training camps to the same place every winter. We go 2 or 3 times, and there was just, you know, there was no team equipment there necessarily, except for just what you'd imagine a core session to look like or a mobility session to look like. So I was able to kind of start from scratch and go, right, well, this is where we can take it in a direction with training equipment that will follow the team around through the season. From the rider's point of view, I would describe as quite cultural in the sense of like wherever they were from originally, you know, like Southern
Yeah.
European have done a lot less. And then guys in like literally Northern Europe have done a lot more or had experienced it before. And I think that's probably quite typical across a few different teams. Um, and the riders, I think I was learning about the riders' motivations to do it. All of them actually were in my first year keen. And I think in that first year, a
That's
lot,
good.
like I learned and they learned a lot about the situation of who could and who could not manage it in the sense of mentally, physically, you know, like we just spoke about, like um, the opportunity to do it, the cost of that to your recovery and your nutrition and things. I think some guys have been so embedded in a routine of multiple seasons of training a certain way or delivering a certain type of training and routine that actually to add strength training in has been quite was brand new and quite difficult initially. So yeah, it was quite a mixture, but I think we've landed on a number of people now who are sorry, someone in the room. 2 seconds. I'm gonna make him into thank you. Sorry.
No worries.
um, I think we're in a position now where we've got guys who are really invested in it because we've got imagine we have 30 on the roster. We're almost down to like 17 to 20 riders who are now fully invested and are starting to buy kit for home. And I think it's so you just go through that first couple of years of like, okay, everyone starts, and then we start filtering to actually, okay, these are guys who are on the bus on the journey on it, and these are the guys who are starting to really invest in the space with their own equipment at home. We're using Output Sports for VBT. They're also investing in like massage and stuff at home, and you know, it's not just strength training, it's everything that sits around the recovery and looking after themselves a little bit more than just I ride my bike, like you said, I ride my bike and lie on the sofa and the rest is taken care of with that. So yeah.
So, what could you roughly outline what like typical improvements you saw in the riders? So now you've worked with a lot of these riders from doing no background in strength training to what have you been with the team 2 years now? Like what what sort of improvements have you seen in the riders' performance, which you believe you could at least some part accredit to the strength
Yeah.
training?
Yeah. Okay. So kind of
Obviously,
like,
it's hard to separate because, like you said, you got new coaches. The riders might
yeah.
have
Yeah.
only just started racing in the World Tour, so they'll be getting better skills and racecraft. And
Yes.
but
Yeah. Exactly.
yeah, I guess you've
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you're
you
right.
must
You
have an
start like
idea.
as a coach, and certainly as an S&C coach, so someone who I don't write the training of the plan, the on-bike training, or I don't write the overall plan. I'm very much supporting the training plan. So my input into the plan is obviously the strength and conditioning training sessions, the kind of recovery modalities to a degree, like the manual stuff, the stuff they do themselves,
Yeah,
and then also the planning side. So where we put training sessions against on the bike work, and even starting to kind of input a little bit around what type of on-bike work would suit well in this scenario if we're trying to go after a certain specific performance domain of short-term power production or sprintability or TT. Or so it's almost like, yeah, there's a few kind of planning and organization bits. So you're invested and you have your own biases a little bit around, well, you see someone perform well, you're like, that's probably those things that we did.
yeah,
But I think the things that we, and certainly impossible to test. And even just in the world of parameters and hearing about the I suppose reliability and of parameters in training and travel and altitude and all this stuff. So it's even hard to say, like, from an on-bike perspective, our riders really kind of moving in the right direction. But there is enough evidence, and I guess there's enough knowledge and trust in everyone's training and planning. I think when we're at a really good place now where we can look at something that we've done, a block of training that's gone well, performances that have been delivered that are good, and then hopefully and rightfully good results off the back of those performances. And it's almost like a cascade effect. We've had a good result, the performance has gone well for that result. It's deserved in the sense of it wasn't a luck result. It wasn't just because so and so had crashed and someone else was through behind him or whatever. Um, and I think it's often like, certainly I think with the type of riders we have who are coming through at the moment, it's the GC type guys. It's the smaller guys
well,
who are have to finish fast or punch or control attacks or go with attacks, or make attacks. And it's those sort of guys who are seeing, I think, bigger improvements in. Now, my thought is with this is that, whether it can link it to the science or link it to the type of the person that's doing it, they've done less of it before because of the nature of they are GC type riders, naturally good at climbing, smaller body weight, smaller amount of muscle mass. Some of those guys also, if you look at them just as individual humans, they have quite a kind of variety. They have a good, varied sort of abundance of fast fiber. They're not just diesels. So we're quite lucky to have guys that can have a second or third gear after kind of the, should we say,
5 hour stage
yeah,
in the mountains.
yeah.
Yeah.
So we're quite lucky we're granted with those types of riders, and those types of riders have quite reliable adaptations to strength training. So we kind of see good consistent effects off of training blocks. Now, it's not to say that I can put a percentage because we don't measure it and we don't rely on just the power data. But if you look at the training that they're doing on the bike and off the bike, where they're kind of we're looking at like neuromuscular training on the bike, we're looking at short VO2 max, we're looking at torque, we're looking at delivering basically mechanical work, like purely from let's deliver mechanical work first so that we can guarantee or at least put them in the right position to do something useful off the back of all that metabolic work from the first 3/4 of the race. And then off the bike with strength training, we know my belief is maximal strength training is the most effective way to increase mechanical workload, and mechanical output in a rider like that. So when you put all of that recipe together, then you see the results where riders are able to attack and control attack and protect minutes, or seconds in GC, or just a
So if
particularly
we
hard
if we'd
finish that does. that does require, big watts per kilo just to finish, in a bunch where it's super steep at the end, or it's a punchy climb to finish, or so I think it's those are the guys, but also those are the guys that are performing well on the team and are providing the performances. If you look across other roles in the team, flat support, sprint, lead out, it's difficult to say, because if we were a really strong sprint lead out team, we might be having a different conversation. So yeah,
Yeah.
but that's my belief at the moment. Yeah.
Well, I mean, you can crudely look at a rider's results and say, has at least some part of, or the whole package of what they're doing, been successful. And I was just looking at Lenny Martinez pro cycling stats just now. I've got it up here, just trying to see what his results have looked like from pre and post you starting in Bahrain. And it does look like all his best results have been 20, certainly 24 onwards, 2025 onwards. And I know he's a rider you've worked quite closely, who kind of follows all the sort of characteristics of a rider. You were saying there responds quite well to the strength training, and that he's low 50 kilos. He's a climber, but he's actually got quite good sprint and anaerobic capacity naturally as well. But it just looks like you've managed to really work on kind of maximize all that with him. I mean, he might have just been naturally maturing. He might have got better racecraft, but it does look like something he's been doing in the last 2 years has improved his performances quite a lot. Would
I think
you
you
be
say it.
able to approximately share, like, like, just from his physiological profile, is there anything noticeable that you've seen that's improved? Like, has his sprint improved significantly? Has his 1 to 2 minute power improved? Is it his fatigue resistance, or could you pinpoint any sort of physiological markers that you think have contributed to that improvement in race performance?
Yeah, so I am in conversation rather than me going into the numbers. So my way of doing it is speaking to the coach and kind of going, what are you seeing? When we've done a significant chunk of time across a year, or at the end of the season, or at the end of the preparation window in January, February time, I kind of go, what are you seeing? Have you noticed anything across all the kind of domains? Yeah,
Yeah,
so Lenny, I mean, specifically, I guess, good amount of peak power ability. So the ability just to produce it in the first place, because he has got that fiber in him.
yeah.
Seen that increase, drop off. Um,
Increased drop off. What do you mean?
sorry, drop off
Fresh
from
to
kind of,
fatigued state.
yes,
Yeah. So
across.
his sprint is more durable now.
Yeah. For example, if you're doing sprints throughout a ride, rather than like, I'm not going to open the tin of worms of durability training, because I don't think that's my area. But for example, consistently hitting higher power across efforts.
Yeah.
Um, um,
So
yeah,
say, whereas before, if you'd done 10-second sprints over a 5-hour ride, the drop off from the sprints in the first to the last hour would have been 200 watts, and now it's only 40 watts or something like that.
and whether that's consistently delivering higher power, or if it is just like a fatigue resistance thing, or greater ability to recruit all your fiber, and therefore just a bit higher force output and higher ability to create more peak power, and therefore there's just a lesser drop off because there's a bigger peak.
Yeah.
Across essentially that, when you're looking at that neuromuscular stuff, I think that's been the biggest feedback point, is that anaerobic side, and that's probably across all the guys who have invested in that. It's hard to
Yeah.
say, because not all of them are sprinters, or at least have to sprint, even if they want to. If they're doing it in training, it's like an output for training, but it's not necessarily like uh, part of their performance. So you're training your muscular system with sprints, or torque work and strength training, but you might not necessarily see them being a sprint
Yeah, because they might
Right.
be a mountains domestique or something.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the key things. Certainly feedback has been around that, and yeah, so sprint power, VO2 max, short power. In some aspects, there's been a little change in sort of, even critical power, like 15-10-15 minute domains and stuff, like when they did maximal all out effort. But again, it's you move further away from reliability as you go close to those like longer capacities and stuff. Um, yeah, and I think also they've got, yeah, just it's also like how you deliver it. Is it seated? Is it standing? Seated, obviously, I think is one of the real kind of big
Yeah.
ones that stands out from strength training is guys when they're doing seated efforts, like the numbers come up a lot across the board, or the noise back from coaches is, wow, okay, seated efforts are really coming in, whether that's seated accelerations, torques, um, seated power, seated sprint, just for that, like that, again, that training outcome rather than it being a race specific thing. But it's always that seated element that I think also comes up quickly with guys, certainly in the winter.
I think a good example of that is you look at some races like I think a good example is Strada Bianchi, where like the short climbs are on, a rough, well, it's on Strada Bianchi, isn't it? So if you're trying to put out power, and you see this in some gravel races as well, if you're getting out of the seat to produce power, your translation to speed will actually be quite a lot less because your wheels are sort of sliding around a lot. So what you can see there is some like sort of heavier, more like, yeah, classics, time trialist type guys can actually sort of ride at a similar speed as, I don't mean to pick on him, hopefully, but someone like Roman Bardet, who's like this one of the skinniest sort of, I know he's retired now, but your typical really skinny climber who might be doing, 0.5 to 1 watt per kilo more than Wout van Aert up, a steep sort of Strada Bianchi climb, but actually going the same speed because he has to go out the seat, and then the translation of that power into linear momentum speed is not as good. And I definitely say I'd noticed that in myself and in my riders that, yeah, it seems like one of the main things the strength training helps with is like seated power over threshold on a,
Hmm.
yeah, and like just torque
Hmm.
in the seat. Whereas when you're weaker, you have to you reach to go out of the seat more to produce that over
Definitely,
threshold
yeah.
power.
Yeah, and you see guys who will move in and out the seat a bit more. I've seen like really tall, quite tall, riders who are kind of missing that structural strength, and you see them sort of almost like manipulating themselves out the saddle to kind of get the bike. When they're at their end range of like knee extension, they're moving the bike around, and it is just a style of riding. But if you're trying to do that and you're doing it in a race,
Yeah,
and you're having to deliver something on a certain speed, seated on climbs that are shallower, it's difficult. So I think,
yeah,
yeah, like it's obviously about the performance, the watts per kilo, but also I think looking specifically how they're delivering it is quite interesting. Like we said, it's
well, no, the objective is the speed, isn't it?
yeah,
If you can go the same speed using less watts per kilo, that's a
yeah,
big advantage.
yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we've got a TT rider, well,
So
TT specialist who's similar. We're training him in almost the same way that we would be training like Lenny or a fast finisher, and I'm training him for those same sort of strength adaptations, but it's for a different outcome. It's in a sense for a performance outcome. It's the translation onto the bike is probably different because he rides in a different way and he's using that high power for slightly longer durations. Still all out effort, but we're talking minutes, not seconds. Um,
yeah,
yeah. So it's quite simple when it works.
yeah. So onto a topic now that um sort of typical listeners might find more translatable into their day-to-day training. So let's say I know you've got a S&C coaching business as well, and same as if you were working with an athlete or you're working with one of your athletes in Bahrain, and you're starting a new training block. How do you decide what main lifts to, what main exercises to give someone? Like, what are the factors you decide in there? Like, why should someone do trap bar deadlift or a back squat or a Bulgarian split squat or a leg press, or there are lots of different ways to strength train. So and I think you'd agree that trying to do too many exercises all at once, either in the same session or the same training block, is counterproductive. So what are your what's your process there around this exercise selection?
Yeah. So specifically around this for endurance athletes, and we'll keep it quite broad, I guess. We'll talk about runners and cyclists, and just talk about endurance. Even triathletes as well.
Even
I think,
triathletes. Well.
yeah. Well, they've got the time.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, my belief is like, the main benefit is from like a small amount of super stable, highly sort of specific in the sense of, we'll talk about specificity, I guess, in a minute, highly specific set of strength exercises that are consistently performed. So there's like a really deep skill ability in them, and that they elicit one, like the kind of force requirement a little bit, like we need to make sure it's intense enough, heavy enough, done at the right force and velocities, if you want to talk about that, to elicit what we need to happen to tissue so that it's adapting beyond and at least to what we need from an adaptation for improved performance. And then also, like we spoke about some of the stuff earlier, there's a little bit of a correspondence between um, muscle groups, if you want to call it that. I won't say movements, but muscle groups, if we're talking about runners and cyclists, that we're targeting areas with those exercises that are group specific in their actions. And then lastly is that they have the ability to be overloaded, because some movements, if you look on the internet and certainly on Instagram, and people who are pushing out S&C programs for runners and cyclists, you look at the exercise and you think, yeah, like even sometimes the exercise is a good exercise, but there's no, like, you can't, where do you go from that exercise? Like, how do you create overload? And how do you know the athlete is at the point of needing something at that level, in the sense of like the exercise you've chosen, was there not 2 or 3 sort of regressions in that exercise that would be more appropriate before you get to this one? And then therefore, where do you go with that training afterwards? So hopefully that kind of roundabout sort of headline answers the question. I think it's a very simple formula, and I think a good bit of advice I was given is like, the more simple the program, typically the more experienced the S&C coach. If you look at something and go, wow, I could write that on a napkin, it's probably like a really experienced, good quality S&C coach writing the training plan, because they have good confidence and consistency over what they believe works, than sometimes what we see and hear on the internet, which certainly in the cycling space has really wowed me in the last 6 to 12 months. Like I thought we're kind of beyond like guru stuff, but yeah, maybe you've seen some of the replies I've given out on Instagram. Because I don't know how Instagram works. Maybe it pops up that so and so replied, and like,
So I see it then.
yeah,
Yeah.
so many question marks over what people are pushing.
Yeah.
So anyway, but yeah, hopefully that helps. Does that answer the question around? There's like a mechanical aspect, there's a neuromuscular aspect, and there's like an overload aspect, if you want to call it that.
So should we use an example then to help illustrate this? So
Yeah.
let's talk about who's your rider, who's the time trialist?
There's a few. I suppose Alex Sagart is a good example. Who's sort of like
Okay.
a TT specialist in the style of riding that he is.
So let's say it's December or November. He's coming off his off season, and he's going into a year where his objective is to, I don't know, win his national time trial championships, podium in some Grand Tour time trials, support the team in team time trials, and I don't know, be a lead up man and
Right
domestique
away
and
from the
flat
peloton.
stages. Yeah. So when kind of his rider characteristics, um,
Sure.
what his objectives are, and he's had a sort of season break. What are you thinking, like, or what other things do you need to know to decide, like, is he going to do back squats or
Okay. Yeah.
deadlifts or
Yeah. So I
single
mean,
leg, double leg work?
Sure. To talk you through the process, so it starts with a really simple intake, if you want to call it that, at the start of the year. And myself and the head physio will screen 99% of the riders, and certainly new riders to us. And that screening is just initially just sit down, have a chat, and talk about, right, what have you injured in the last 12 months, and previous to that, any major injuries? What's caused you pain? What's kept you off the bike? So any limitations to your availability, that's like just literally sitting down and talking about it. Sometimes we even send out a questionnaire so we have that information before we even sit with them. And then it's a kind of more clinical based physio bed assessment, joint by joint, looking at sort of passive active range of movement, some competency. I would call it like competency around their function. So simple stuff like single leg stability, foot stability, um, trunk trunk integrity. Like can you simply hold some trunk holds? McGill style trunk holds. Can you have you got good range of movement through your cervical and thoracic spine? So the most basic stuff first. Then we talk about like experience in the strength training world. So what have they done? What are their preferences? Have they had injuries or niggles from it? And then actually like right next to the physio bed, we've got a gym set up. So like what I deem is like the normal home gym we would aspire them all to have. So it's a barbell, set of stands, some plates, a couple of adjustable dumbbells, a Bulgarian split squat stand, and a bench or a box and a mat. So like a basic home gym setup. And effectively, we'll off the back of all the information we've just got and gained, we go through some movements. So we just start there and then with like, okay, we know some foundational lifts might be, for example, a squat pattern, so a double leg strength pattern, a single leg strength pattern, or split stance pattern, some kind of hinge posterior chain pattern. And then if we need it, something extra like a machine. And that might be for like something that's either to avoid, back pain, or it's a lower skill alternative. Or it's like going to be used in a very specific situation and we want the rider to have access to it for periods of time. Um, and then accessory work or complementary work. So outside of those sort of driving exercises, off the back of how they move, how stable they are, what their competency is like, what their stability is like, their body awareness is like, their foot stability, which is underrated, like how their feet talk to the floor. What else does a rider need to do just to kind of improve asymmetries and how the brain is effectively driving the body a little bit? Because a lot of the time riders don't have injuries, or they haven't had much injury, but they still had crashes. And so if you have like a high impact on your left hip, but you walk away unscathed, your muscle still goes through a trauma. And so you then jump on the bike very quickly after that, but you can often suffer with a lot of, bruising and like lower drive to the tissue. And that then is inherently built into your cycling technique, your pedaling technique. And then down the line, you start developing asymmetries, maybe power imbalances, which if they don't present problems or injuries aren't a problem, but they can, and often they do. And then people get knee pain out of nowhere, or they're more prone to knee pain when they go to like high overload blocks. And it's not because they haven't looked after themselves. It's probably because their body from a crash 6 months before, they haven't really addressed like the fact their left leg just doesn't produce the same amount of force or as quickly as it used to. So we kind of do a lot of like just actually what I describe as like loaded movement, loaded movement control, where you're just basically having a load or something pulling you from one side to the other. You're offloading something like a kettlebell up on your shoulder or down one side of your body, and you're performing lunges or split squats or lateral squats or hinges, single leg movements, step ups, step downs, like anything and everything, foot stability work that will effectively, for that person, drive one side of the body more and ask more of that like focus to fire the tissue and allow it to stabilize and work with other parts of the body around it. So hopefully that gives you a little bit more about, like, it's for me, it's always about the holistic program. If I was just worried about performance, I would go like, there's a leg press, go and do that twice a week. And quite often that's all a rider needs. And sometimes that's all we do. But if we're able to start from the start and work with an athlete from the beginning, that's what we try and do, to try and really like take care of the full picture. Because I think a lot of times like knee injuries and stuff like this crop up through, yeah, sometimes it can be bad training planning, too many hours in a short space of time doing TT or climbing or whatever. But quite often I think riders are um, deemed to be really fragile, and we shouldn't change bike position. We shouldn't ask them to do too much in one domain, whether that's, going on a clamp and doing extra climbing because they live at the top of a mountain for 2 weeks. But I think as riders should be robust to take on all those things, and like that's up to them to.
Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah.
So yeah, it's a long process, but once people buy in, once the riders buy into that, like they understand where we're trying to go with it, then the incentive and the kind of internal motivation is there because they can see what we're trying to do. We're not just giving them some core exercises because they might have back pain. It's like we're trying to shape the program around making them not more symmetrical, but because no body is symmetrical, but we're trying to take care of asymmetry and we're trying to improve firing across the body so that they can basically be more adaptable on the bike, if that makes sense. Adaptable to changes in the environment, in position, in load. And being stronger is a huge part of it, obviously. Um, but
Yes.
a lot
Yeah.
of the part of it is just actually just having better movement control is what I describe it as.
Yeah, that's excellent. I mean, I notice when like a good precursor to like a rider having some kind of injury, and particularly with like knee pain on the bike, is that they're normally 50-50 or 49-51, then that in the sort of few rides before that knee pain starts, that left right balance has been going more like 47-53, 46-54. Then like if the rider is always like that, then that's less of a concern. But if they're normally very symmetrical and that starts drifting over a few rides, I've noticed that tends to correlate quite strongly with some kind of
Okay.
niggle or injury
That's
starting.
interesting. Yeah. I'll bear that in mind. It's something, obviously, it's obvious when you hear someone say it. And obviously, I'm aware we talk quite a lot about imbalances and whether they're meaningful or not. And I think you need to have pretty good equipment. I'd say you need to have those pedals that measure force, in 3 planes and like quite high level lab based equipment to really dig into, well, where's the imbalance coming from? Because it's happening, but we don't know how. Is it due to position? Is it due to muscle force production? Is it technical skill, or is it from a trauma previous, like all those things? But yeah, it's interesting, like you say, if it regardless of that, if it increases and then you see an injury, that's quite an interesting thing to look at. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think from the perspective I'm using it there, I don't need to know um in a way like exactly where is the imbalance. Like, is it because your left quad is too tight or your right glute is too tight, or whatever? But just the fact is that there probably needs to be some adjustment in load,
Yeah.
and an introduction of some kind of intervention to get that addressed. But because you'd also see it with like for me, I could, if I put my saddle too high and then did a ride, like I'd know that my left right balance would be out. And if I've got a new bike and or some new shoes, something, and I'm trying to dial that in, that can often be a sign of like when is my when is my saddle height correct? Is when is the left right balance about 50-50 where I'd normally expect it to be if everything is healthy and working fine.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. I'm always a little bit like, I shun it a little bit because I don't know, I don't trust it enough, but it's also because I haven't paid a huge amount of attention to it, if that makes sense. That's why my answer before was a bit like, oh no, we need, you need
Yeah.
high level equipment. And I suppose to a degree, yeah, that gives you the ideal of where is that coming from. But like you say, if you've got enough intuity, like you do, to understand where it normally is, regardless of how it's happening, and then where it's going when you make tweaks, that's a really high level way of looking at it. Yeah, nice.
Yeah. Because it's obviously you need to know what type of change is meaningful and what range is like, normal for that person. For example, I've got one client who I'm sure won't mind being mentioned, who only, due to a crash, he's only got one of the fascicles in one of his quads.
Right.
So, like, you normally have quad because it's 4, isn't it? And he's only got one on one leg.
Well,
So his left-right balance is obviously quite extreme, but then that's what's normal for him and how kind of that behaves depending on fatigue and different durations of effort.
yeah.
Whereas like for me, who was touch would not had any super major injuries like that, I know if I'm even starting to go 49-51, that's not good. And if I start going 49-51, it's like, oh, my hips hurting, my knees hurting. But then I can go, and it's normally because I haven't done enough strength training or haven't been to the gym for a
Yeah.
week and a half, even, or 2
Right.
weeks.
Okay. Yeah.
And I go in the gym, get some good activation, and literally the next ride, it'll be back to 50-50. So
Yeah.
it's just about, knowing that athlete and how that responds. But
Yeah.
um,
And also
yeah,
interesting, just on that last part, about there's obviously there's passive, that's active ways of doing it, with the with strength training and going in and having to create like high level recruitment. But you can also do it at home. Pre-ride is a thing. And I think it should
yeah,
be used super specifically rather than like everyone needs to do pre-ride. But like for example, isometrics can be done at home quite easily with a simple pull-up bar, across the door frame. You can set that position anywhere you want, from half squat all the way up to just almost standing, and you can do calf raises into it. But super useful thing to be able to generate high amounts of muscular drive and tension, and obviously you can create stimulus and train with isometrics. But that's
yeah,
a real nice way to create some sort of potentiation, or yeah, like output before you go and do something repetitive at a low submaximal level. um and also like even sometimes like stimulation, so like tens or electrical stimulation can be used passively around training.
right, yeah,
Help, just
yeah,
passively, if you're between sessions, you don't actually want to get up off the seat and do anything. You can have that around your training to help stimulate, whether it's like a little hypertrophy thing you're working on around a quad or a calf. So like those are all extra bits that can add in, but very specific, obviously a niche for the work that's needed to get the stimulation, I guess,
yeah.
the outcome.
Well, perhaps, yeah, we can, when we get Richard Ferguson on to talk about his BFR, we can
Oh yeah,
cover
yeah,
more stuff like that.
nice.
Um, but yeah, just last thing on that, like little activation topic then. A lot of times when people think activation, they think of like getting their sort of resistant bands out and doing like glute bridges and all like the videos you see of Pogacar like warming up outside the bus. Um, can you please kind of clarify like why that's probably not gonna give you a 7 watt per kilo threshold, and it's not, it's not really the difference.
Yeah, it's funny. It's good, isn't it? Um, yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Like how it's I think it's good. It's really good that it's being put
Okay,
out
so
there.
has your
And
perspective changed a bit there then? Because
I think it's good that
I remember,
it's been put out there, from a perspective
yeah,
of like just that there's something being done before, like an athlete is warming up in some manner before they go and do the sport. That's not just doing the sport.
yeah,
Um, I think that's only good for the sport. Around specifically like bands or submaximal work. Yeah, where do you draw the line on activation? Because activation is essentially just, it's everything from walking up the steps of the bus
walking,
to
yeah, yeah,
to doing the final VO2 max ramp of your TT specific warm up, isn't it? So I think like everything, it's got to be specific to what the athlete needs on the day for them, what they buy into. Maybe also what they need on an ongoing basis, like on a microdosing basis in the background. So I do give out stuff like that across training blocks, camps. Even like a TT warm up may have some exercises that are unloaded, to generate a little bit of change in like muscle length tension. If you're doing a split squat and your rear leg is stretched out behind you, your rec fem is already under stretch, it's under load. and tension. And then if you drop down through that movement, you're getting an increase in length across that fiber. It's getting increasing fiber tension length relationship. So then if you can like load that or do something maybe isometric specifically with that on the front leg or the back leg, you're creating higher levels of activation in those positions. Now that doesn't look like the sport, but it's actually quite good because you're then opening up how much your pelvis can kind of move in those degrees of freedom. You think about your hip flexor is under a high amount of load on the back leg, your hamstring and glute is on a higher load on the front leg, and your pelvis is stabilizing in between the two. And if you do that on both sides, suddenly it's got used to kind of working in like this really sort of fixed position on the bike in the TT position or on the hoods in a warm up and during the sport. But then you're doing something really high end maximal where it's got to stabilize across both legs under a good amount of length tension on the posterior chain and the anterior chain. So for me, that's a really nice, just a basic warm up. Some lunges, split squats, isometric split squats, is a great way to just generate like a real strong, stable contraction across the pelvis. And actually, I think would be, would be like a nice thing to add into riders who go into like maybe fast starts or TTs, prologues, that kind of thing. But yeah, like the lower level stuff, I don't know. It's preferential. I think it's not going to generate any kind of potentiation. It's too low level.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think some of the stuff around glute activation or posterior chain activation. No, I mean, if it's something that the rider continually needs to work on because of what we spoke about around a crash and they have some sort of functional deficit on one side, or it fits into their ongoing work behind what they're trying to do around their function, then there's a rationale to go and do some bridges or some step outs or some mini squats with a band or whatever, because it's just ongoing work for that person. So yeah.
But if that was ongoing work for that person still, like if you just do some squats with a resistance band on, or you do like fire hydrants or whatever, these little fiddly glute activation exercises, isn't that's not going to really do anything for your strength either, is it? Like even if, let's say, you've got an imbalance from a crash, like isn't it also going to be a waste of time from not just like a warming up perspective, but from a working on the imbalance perspective as well?
Yeah, I think there is. However, it depends on that person's like level, in the sense of
Yes,
if
yeah,
they're kind of sort of load recovery cycle is really disparate. If they're kind of like say pro level world tour cyclists, like training those super high, and therefore the function off the bike is really low because they're basically training really hard on the bike, lots of hours, lots of intensity, whatever, multiple days, and so what they're doing off the bike is, like you said at the start of the call, is like just basically being like static. So
yeah.
actually, for free and for 3 weeks of a grand tour. So then if you take someone like that, the skeletal system, musculoskeletal system is like relatively quite detrained outside of like the kind of the tension across the lower body and that specific cycling pattern. So that's where, yeah, actually doing some low level work where you're working through slight eccentric concentric contractions, you're taking muscles through different lengths and tensions, you're generating a bit of force across the tissue, can be good because it's also a low cost to the rider because they're not holding loads, they're not doing lots of it, so hopefully there's not like a lot of fatigue from it. Does that land them in a better position after 2 weeks of racing, a week of racing, 3 weeks of racing? Not sure. But I
Yeah.
think there's something like I've thought about a lot recently is like in race, because we're in this sort of race box now, where if a rider does go through say 2 or 3 weeks and they just do sort of bodyweight mobility exercises, bodyweight squats, bodyweight lunges, like versus someone who doesn't, do they arrive more ready to start strength training after that? I don't know. I
Surely they
think I
do.
think it might help them. I think it might help them a little bit
Yeah.
because your muscles are just used to the contractions, and there's a little bit of synergy. Synergy is like different muscles firing, working together across a movement. And if you've done that, say 35 reps, 30, 40 reps per week versus you haven't, it's maybe going to feel a bit more natural and able to load a little bit faster on the other side. But
Well,
saying
what
that,
I
I
think
haven't
is,
yet.
say that the rider would normally squat 5 sets of 500 kilos, then
Yeah.
when they're in a grand tour, if they squat once or twice a week, 2 sets of 2 reps at 70 kilos, surely like that's going to generate absolutely negligible fatigue, and it's probably going to improve their performance. If certainly it's not going to detriment it, but that could go quite a long way to maintaining their strength.
Massively, yeah. And that was, I was literally just about to say, I've said all that and I've still not written a training plan or anything like that for any sort of race longer than 2 or 3 days. Like it's not in the culture of the sport yet.
Yeah,
It's not seen as being useful
yeah,
and productive, and I've gone along with that because I also question it a little bit. But like you say, for sure on the rest day, if they're getting on their bikes on the rest day and going to the cafe and doing that, when they come home or when they come back to the hotel or the bus or whatever, could there be a strength protocol there that they do? Yeah, yeah. And could it potentiate the next day on a team time trial? Probably, maybe. So what is
yeah,
it's just interesting area for sure.
yeah. So and then the next topic, which is you've informed my ideas and perspectives around, is so when you look at most of most of the scientific literature that is certainly popular and that you see around on social media and stuff about strength training for endurance athletes, it'll always focus around sort of maximal strength work. So, sets of, let's say, 1 to 6 repetitions normally that I guess, do you normally hear like at least 80% of 1 RM kind of
Yeah,
thrown around?
80, 85.
Um,
Yeah,
85% of 1 rep max. Um, so you never really hear people talking about doing like hypertrophy focused gym training for endurance athletes, but it's something that you think there is, at least for some riders and some situations, there is value to doing. So yeah, do you want to talk us through that, and with maybe some examples of like, are there any riders on Bahrain who you've used some hypertrophy type work for?
yeah. Yeah, I think yeah, you said there, it's really an individual thing. And I've said that so many times throughout this because I hate being like, I don't want to be quoted on like an absolute. I'm definitely not one of those absolute characters. But I guess, yeah, I guess there's a question around what's limiting performance. Is it a neural force production? Is it a structural capacity thing? And obviously, is it an endurance thing? Now, we've spoken a little bit around the metabolic side is a massive part of delivering. It is the sport. It is delivering, the ability to finish wherever you finish. How high up the kind of the leaderboard or first over the line is almost an expression of your mechanical ability. Um, if you look at VO2 maxes across top 5, top 10 GC riders are probably not that different from each other, but what is different is their mechanical abilities. Um, so I think just in that argument already, there's an interesting bit around hypertrophy because hypertrophy plays such a massive. You look at all the other sports that require, strength, power, or delivering a short duration sort of effort in a period of time. Hypertrophy does play a massive part in force production. And I've always sat in the camp of like, I think it's first with cyclists specifically, first we care about force production, improving your capacity to tolerate and create force. And then we go after the most efficient way to train that for that person. So as an example, um, if there's a rider, there's probably 2 riders that sort of stand out in my brain. Um, there's a rider where the coach has sort of said, actually, I think this rider could deal with a little bit more functional mass, and essentially like more mass around the quad and the glute is what I would deem as functional mass. To deliver that high force repeated attack, repeated output demand, repeat accelerations, frequent torque spikes on the pedals at the end of a race. And, you sort of typically what you see in a track endurance rider, or a criterium rider. that's like like Copenhagen and some of these races that we've had recently, where you see riders who have like, I can't remember, was it 2 weeks ago, the Copenhagen race? There's one obviously yesterday. There's another one 2 weeks ago, where it was like watching a junior race at the end, where they're just like bang bang off. Just it's like concertina constantly, and you look at that and go, yeah, you need a huge amount of you have to have a huge engine to deal with like just the recovery and the effort between. But actually, when you're going and when you're pushing on the pedals, if all else is equal, CDA, um, weight more than likely, everything else, it's like who can handle the best repeated high force output without fatiguing. And so I think if you continue working on the endurance aspects, which everyone will be, then you've got very high FTP, VO2 max. Um, However, there's that sort of missing surge ability, acceleration, not sprint, because that's quite a coordinative thing. We're talking about generating seated power, like from a kind of sort of low to regular RPM, where you're kind of surging and attacking coming off. Not like, we're not talking top end finishing on a flat sprint where it is way up above 100, 120 RPM. We're talking more like the kind of the higher force demand on the pedaling side. I think then you do really lean into having more muscle mass, because it's not just about can you recruit all your fiber. It's okay, you're recruiting all your fiber because you're already doing some strength training, you're doing some of the work on the bike that will improve that as well. But have you got more fiber to recruit from, and can you spread that workload across that fiber? So yeah, that's where I think hypertrophy is useful, and I think it's got to be programmed and considered with a lot of thought, because there is like a negative connotation with it across, like just weight gain for starters, watts per kilo, power to mass, the consideration around like the um, the blood delivery, blood supply of that tissue. And then obviously there's like a little bit of kind of talk about like the fiber type shifting that takes place in strength training, which is sort of like a hypertrophy adaptation, because it sort of is, you're talking about, type X, so your kind of freshest, fastest fiber that you would use to kind of switch on, if you have to just jump on a box, that'll be your type 2X. That generally starts to convert into more type 2A, basically becomes more fatigue resistant. So it can still put out high amounts of force. It can just do it more repeatedly. That's a real common sort of talked about adaptation, which for me is still a hypertrophy style. It's a structural adaptation. So all those things fall under the bucket of, yeah, hypertrophy. So yeah, lots of things to consider. How I program it for the Bahrain rider we were talking about before, where the coach said, I think it would be useful to start there, is we say it was in season, because it was only about the last sort of 5, I think, weeks or so we had. We would still go after maximum strength, because for me that's the most optimal way, the kind of most efficient way to generate force production. So your 6 to 3 rep range. We tag on like higher rep or drop set style rep sets at the bottom. So he would work up to heavy loads, hit your three top sets, if you want to call it that, really drive the neural system, drive the recruitment. We do that either with heavy loads, slow movement, like maximum strength training, or maybe a little bit further up. So still quite heavy, but I'd say moderate load, moderate speed. So we're sort of tapping into like a bit of a faster movement, faster recruitment, if you want to call it that, up the corridor. Then we tag on to 2 or 3 sets where you're kind of going quite close to failure, but you're kind of hitting your higher rep range on a shorter recovery. I think for cyclists, guys like that, fast finishers, and not complete sprint guys, but classics riders or Ardennes riders, guys who need to be able to repeatedly attack and surge, and deal with like high watt per kilo over and over again. I think that's a really nice sort of way to tackle the problem, because you're gaining maximum strength. We're ticking in all those neural boxes, but then we're also tagging on some low risk, high rep set or high rep and high load sets. And the rider can stop when he feels, like we might plan 3, but he might only do 2 because he's like cooked himself. And that way you're not dedicating like a whole session to like hypertrophy. You're doing your nuts and bolts work, and then we're going to tag on some hard work sets at the end based on how you're feeling and how much you need to respond.
And that's also probably more manageable around your on bike training as well, if
Yeah,
you're not
exactly.
got
So if he's
such a heavy
exactly, yeah.
hypertrophy
So if he's feeling
stimulus
good on a
all the
day,
session.
if he's feeling good on a day, he might do 2 or 3 tag on sets. So say back squat with building up to three big sets, and then 2 or 3 tag on sets at the end, where drop sets effectively, where the reps might increase every set, and you're just dropping the weight back a small amount. So you're still hitting 0 reps in reserve, if you want to call that 1 rep in reserve. The nice thing of that is the the high load sets tend to potentiate, you've got that higher drive, the bar's heavier, then when you drop down on the weight, you can move that lighter weight a little bit faster. So you can actually use heavier weight than you would have if you just gone 3 sets of 8, for example. If you went 8, 12, 10, 8, 10, 12, you generally can use heavier weight after top sets. And then if still good and he can tolerate, we'll then maybe do an additional structural lift, even like a goblet squat or a double leg press or something, which is super low skill, but he can load up as heavy as possible and just do a couple of close to failure sets. And that tends to be like 6 to 8, 6 to 10 rep range. Tend not to go back past 10 too much, because I just feel like, if you're close to failure on anything from 3 up to 15, you can still generate some strength and some hypertrophy change, but I just feel like you need that intensity there from the mechanical recruitment side and everything else. So that for me is like, I think 10 is like a 75 to 75 RM percentage. So yeah, I think 10's light enough, before once you get into that area, the rider probably can do double the reps, even if he's on a 10 RM, if that makes sense, because they're just so good at repeating that high force repeated output work. So
Yeah, and like once you start getting much over sets of 10, it's hard to like calibrate the RPE, isn't it? Because like once you say you're doing sets of 20, it's like you're like, could I do another rep, or I
yeah,
just can't be asked, or I'm bored of this exercise.
exactly.
Whereas
Yeah,
like once you like win 10 reps or under, you do get to that point where you go to the bottom and just like you just can't get back up.
sure. Yeah. So hopefully that answers the question. Seen
Yes, yeah.
a good response in that from riders like Zambanini, Pau Mikel recently, where we've kind of in small doses, very small doses, targeted that a little bit. And I think the thing with hypertrophy, it doesn't need to be used as like, I think everyone's quite hung up on it, obviously from a power to weight point of view because of the weight gain. I see it more as the risk is actually the
effect on the bike training.
yeah, this the kind of the real consideration is that I think the biggest thing around hypertrophy, as in weight gain, is actually more how long chronically, like back to back weeks of 2 gym sessions a week, are you going to spend in the gym. That's what's going to drive more your weight gain over time, because it's about muscle density. That's what creates more weight, and that muscle density happens the more you just lift, and the more you lift around that heavy rep range number, heavy intensity number. So if you train 6 to 8 weeks in the winter versus 10 to 15 guys are probably going to hypertrophy, unless you're some sort of bloat lord, then you're going to be you're going to be more chance of hypertrophy, I think. So
Yeah. So it's that I was going to say, like, how do you know though when you've like or get the balance right with this? Because I mean it's the same in the question of how much fat mass to lose or gain. It's like it's probably quite individual, both depending on like even 2 riders with the same objective doing the same race, like and the same height, one might be better at 70 kilos, one might be better at 75, one might be better at 65 kilos, like. But I guess it's the same sort of question of like,
how much hypertrophy.
how do you find the right amount
Mm,
of like the optimal amount of muscle mass? Because obviously you can go to extremes in either direction, can't you? You can be way too big and you can be way too withered. So
yeah,
like,
yeah. It's a huge one, isn't it? Like, especially with Abrahamson, who's one example, but also Pog, he's gone pretty hard on the gym this year. You can see it's changed his shape a little bit. in the
Yeah.
classics, and obviously changed his performance. Modeling your hypertrophy to what you think is ideal, or your muscle mass weight. It's a big one. I don't think we're there yet at all. I think there's one study that looked at it a little bit in female riders. They tried to look at like the correlated changes in muscle mass to thigh girth to like TT performance and some other markers. I'll see if
Okay.
I can
Yeah.
find it. It's quite an interesting one.
Yeah.
And sort of
Because
working out
in
your
females, it would be a lot harder to study because typically females find it more because they've got less testosterone, can't gain muscle as quickly.
yeah. Yeah, exactly. I think this might have been case study because it was on an injured rider who'd had like a long time out, and so they did a bit of like a long sort of duration of strength training whilst they were injured, and they're kind of modeling it against their changes in metrics whilst things were across like thigh girth were changing. But yeah, I think in the reality of well, certainly with the World Tour is like you've got the time you get given, and you
Yeah.
make the plan best according to that time that you've got. And then when you count across those blocks across the year, you've done something meaningful in that time you've been given. You've done it at that point, this point, and the next point, and that's kind of then the long term adaptations will take care of themselves. But the yeah, in the moment, what I would say is important is monitoring corrected mid thigh girth. So we wouldn't say we need to get it to X or Y, but we monitor it to see how it is changing. And that and your body weight, and on bike power, I think are the key things to look at and just control, keep a close eye on, because people adapt at different rates, and also people adapt. Like you might stop the training, you might stop it for a camp or for a race or whatever, and actually the adaptation is still taking place, and their weight's going up or their muscle mass is starting to change because you've taken that stimulus away, and the recovery process is really taking place. So I think all year round monitoring corrected mid-thigh girth, weight, power, different domains, and also just knowing. Again, it's from my point of view, it's speaking to the coach to say what's useful in this scenario, what's going to make the difference. I don't think we're at the point though yet, and it's quite. I think it could be exciting if we got there, if we sort of said, we truly believe that actually adding 1.5 kilo to this rider or taking 1.5 kilo away,
Yeah.
which would be a more interesting, problem to solve.
Well,
Would
but that is a lot
because
easier, isn't it?
in general, the kind of the general kind of theme across the sport at the moment is get as lean as possible, which I agree is required, and the power will be what it will be because you're doing the training. As long as you're as lean as you can be, and tolerate. Whereas I think account for the lean, account for
But
being.
trying to get leaner compromises, in most cases, it compromises your ability to gain muscle mass if gaining muscle mass was an objective,
Yeah.
and can even like reduce muscle mass, and most like is very especially if you want to lose weight quickly, you're gonna lose some muscle mass with it, and even if you lose weight slowly, it's and if you're not doing strength training, you're probably going to lose some muscle mass with it. So it's not as simple as that, is it?
Yeah, exactly. With though, it's interesting because it really leans into like the nutrition side, and that's not my area of expertise. But as I understand, current sort of strategies out there is if you keep your protein adequate, if you keep your fat to a level like 1 gram, 1.2 or whatever gram per kilo, and you are doing the training and recovering in a way that's productive, all training, strength training and on bike training, like that in itself should be a recipe where you arrive in the best state possible because you've got fat at an adequate level, as long as you're not going below, hypothetically, let's say 35 mils across site of
Yeah, but
7.
it depends what you're doing with your energy availability. Because let's say you've got a rider who's 75 kilos or something, and
Mm-hmm.
like they want and they're doing strength training, they're doing their on bike strength training, and over a 6-month period, like the one rider is in energy balance, the other rider is in an energy deficit. So say the only difference between these two riders is that one has created that energy deficit by reducing fat intake, and the other one hasn't reduced fat intake. So they basically got the same amount of protein, the same amount of carbohydrate available, which theoretically is all that matters to fuel their training, then I'd say at the end of that period, the rider who's been in energy balance is going to have more muscle and more fat
Mhm.
mass because, like when you're in, like certainly to build muscle, like energy availability is
True. Yeah.
critical, isn't it? If you want to maximize hypertrophy, you want to be in at least a small energy surplus
Yes.
because, especially if you're a lean endurance athlete, because it's physics, isn't it? You can't make something out of nothing,
Exactly. Yeah. But I
so
guess
you
my point
can't.
was around that if your fat is at an adequate level and your protein is at an adequate level and you're modulating carbs around your energy output, that's the way I was looking at it, is with carbs being available to do the work required, and that's across strength training as well. Not that you use a lot of carbs in that, but there's an argument that if you don't account for it, there's 500 calories or more going into that potentially that you just you're missing. And I've seen that in the winter, riders getting leaner through winter because they just aren't accounting for that, and they're kind of leaning down through winter because they're doing extra work that they haven't accounted for somewhere in their energy. But normally it's
Yeah,
carbs. No, that's where a lot of that's where all the riders currently are modulating their calorie output and input. Is they're hitting 1 gram for fat, 2 gram for protein, and then the carbs is the bit that they're hitting balance with. Um, I think it shouldn't. I think it'd be a shame if we had in a sport where we're really struggling to keep riders in a state where they can't protect muscle mass. I think that's primary. I think that's the forefront of most nutritionists' mind, is whether they're trying to develop or maintain. But maintain is critical. Even if you're trying to get someone tour ready, it doesn't mean you can't get lean and not maintain muscle mass. I think that's
yeah. Maintaining muscle mass
yeah.
is relatively easy, but it's gaining muscle mass that really benefits from
Of
at
course.
least being in
Yeah, of
energy
course.
balance,
Yeah,
or even
and
more
like
so
that
in a
example
small
where I said,
surplus.
like the example where I said, guys get leaner in the winter. I've also, we've also seen riders gain weight, gain muscle in the winter, and it's not necessarily being intended, but it's happened because that's how they've adapted to the work, and everyone's a little bit surprised, and some people are a bit nervous across, the team, or different people are kind of thinking, oh, is this, is it going to come back off him, and how is it going to affect his watts per kilo? Will he be able to climb? His top end power is brilliant. It's great, and I'm kind of thinking this is really good. We're in a good place. Like almost, I'd be sort of saying go into the early part of the year with a bit of surplus, a bit of reserve in that area, because
Well, yeah, because
surefire
it's always
when you come to
you're not.
July, it's going to probably back to where you were, if not lower.
Yeah,
So yeah, I think that's the like. It'd be really interesting to see how Pog turns up to the tour, because I think he was like 1.5 higher through the classics. He was visibly bigger, and if he
yeah,
developed a physique that performed not just down strength training, but I mean to do what he did in Roubaix and to deliver some of those performances he has, and he's enjoyed strength
yeah,
training. He said he has in some of his interviews. He's like probably overdone it in his words, but if he can now come back to the tour and go and do what he did at the same, not at the same body weight as Spring, but in tour shape, it proves the point. You can manipulate body composition, including muscle mass.
yeah,
And I think a lot of riders
absolutely.
and staff are still scared of that. Are still scared of looking at the classics, going, "Oh, one eye on the Giro and the Tour," and being a bit like, "We can't be too." And you've got to be able to climb for sure. But my argument is generally is if your watts per kilo doesn't change because you've increased functional mass, you've also increased power. So you've got the same watts per kilo, but you've got a hell of a lot more top end and red to go into and survive in because you've got this sort of big anaerobic ability. That's great. That's what you want. And then through the classics, that's going to drop off because you're doing less strength training naturally. And then you arrive at whatever your next race is, and hopefully you've got a rider that's lean. You've got someone who's had good strength, developed really good on-bike power through the classic season or through Ardennes, and now just takes their kind of conditioning to the next level in the prep for for a Grand Tour. Whether that muscle mass and or body weight factor has changed down again to what it would be, then that's fine. But it's, for me, that's good use of training. Is the part of the season at the start which really suits that, like we talked about at the start of the conversation, that short-term power production, short duration sport is essentially what we're looking at with the classics now.
Yeah. Although that leads me on to another question, which I've spoken to you about before, and that's that, if the cross-sectional area of your fiber increases because of this hypertrophy training, that at least theoretically should mean that the capillaries have basically got, a harder job of actually delivering oxygen to the center of that muscle fiber. So at least theoretically, I'm not sure how much good quality research has actually demonstrated this, like the translation of this to performance, but that would impair like aerobic capacity. And so like the same like rider would be actually better having less muscle mass, because they'd be able to more easily deliver oxygen to smaller muscle fibers than larger muscle fibers, all else being equal.
Yeah. So you're saying, sorry, your question is when does hypertrophy become counterproductive?
Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
I
so
mean, is that something you've seen? Like someone does hypertrophy training, and basically their threshold has come down, but like their first and or second threshold has come down
yeah.
because of that. Or yeah,
No, I think I mean
they're
yeah,
powered for longer duration efforts.
I know what you're talking about. Yeah, yeah. If you spend too much in that like anaerobic domain, you start swinging the kind of swinging the thing across. Not in my experience. I'm aware it's out there, and I'm aware it's something that is definitely like. That's why I said at the beginning, I'm always a little very cautious about hypertrophy training and that style of training. That's why I try and use low risk methods like tagging on those sort of drop set type or one key lift at the end of a session dedicated to. I still try
But
and
isn't that just like saying, if it's something you think is bad, then that's like saying, "Oh, I'll just have 5 cigarettes," because
yeah, but also
20 would be too much.
sure. But I also think there's like um, it's hypertrophy is not also like we said at the start as well. It's not just about extra muscle and more tissue and thickness of the tissue, which I think takes quite a long time. Like from a kind of
Yeah,
training recovery cycle perspective of like it's a chronic thing to increase. Um, but do we see early stage adaptations from that type of training, which aren't accounted for in like how much muscle you have or how thick it is or how much blood is delivered, which is what we said about the arc. There's still structural changes that are under the bracket of hypertrophy, like fiber type shifts. Okay, that's sort of like characteristic changes. There's like architectural changes around pennation angle, facile length that all contribute to how the muscle functions and produces force. Those for me kind of come out of that hypertrophy, well, max strength and hypertrophy training. So I don't think one is always just on its own is just better than the other. So blend of both when needed. But yeah, I still think like to answer your question around like those things that I've just mentioned are really good, and those things are the things that I think I try to aim for or hope that happen in a shorter duration, over like say 5 to 8 weeks of time with that style of training, putting on kind of muscle mass that would be described as like more thickness, make bigger girth, just more cross sectional area, not physiological cross section area, but actual cross sectional area of muscle. That for me is probably like the last in the category of things I'd like want to see, just purely from that point of view of all the things you've outlined. Like we don't know about how it does affect the metabolic side. I'm not super confident about that, and I also know it's quite a large investment from the athlete to go after that type of adaptation in the long
yeah,
run, because it's costful, it's sore, it makes your legs feel like shit, and I think the reason why I've not seen it as much is because, or heard about it in conversations as much with riders and the coaches I work with, is because I don't go after it like a sole adaptation.
yeah, because
I
no one does it. Yeah,
Yeah, and also because if you're a half decent endurance athlete, as long as you're doing some endurance training and you don't go from like 20 hours to 10 hours, like you're always going to
yeah,
be
you're not going to see much hypertrophy anyway.
that, and you're always training your metabolic system. So any strength, any tissue that is regenerating, growing, going through that sort of training recovery cycle is constantly being is constantly having blood push through it, having nutrients push through it, having plasma push through it. So it's constantly getting kind of
Any new tissue's going to have like,
yeah.
yeah,
From a point of view, if you're talking
endurance,
about someone who's doing
even
that
endurance
volume, yeah.
phenotype. Yeah.
The
Yeah.
times I've had, I'm trying to think, like genuinely, the times I've had like it go the wrong way, for want of a better phrase, is like in an injury example where the rider's had an injury that's reduced their training time dramatically. We haven't been like as good at changing the program aims, and they have hypertrophy quite a lot or weight gained quite a lot, combination of both things. I think with
Yeah.
world tour guys and pros in general, though, I think the cost is the time cost is so high that they just haven't got the time and or the nutrients and or the energy to really put down extra muscle. So I always think about it of like, well, like with the Runnastab papers, and they talk about potential mechanisms to improve performance, and they talk about fiber type shifts and architectural changes in the muscle that may have improved performance if we don't just talk about neural side, but we talk about muscular side. Yeah, hope that answers
Cool.
your question.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. So we'll just try and get through some quick fire listener questions on some quick fire from me.
Good. Cool.
So someone's asking, should I bother with Smith's machine squats? Or is that a waste of time?
When my first year at working at Bahrain, like I used the Smith machine because it was all we had in the gym at the time in the hotel, and we soon quickly got our own racks. I used it a lot for guys who are complete beginners. Like if you're trying to bridge
Okay.
the gap between using a dumbbell in a goblet squat and getting a bar on your shoulders quickly in a short space of time, Smith machine's a really good option. I'd only use it for a back squat or tempo or a pause or whatever, but I'd use it in a back squat movement. I think it's a good bit of kit, and not, I wouldn't say for all of your lifting career, but for periods of time. There's definitely quality in taking an exercise out and placing it back in. Like re-addition or reintroduction sort of style of training where you just purely take an exercise out, replace it with something for a block, and bring it back in. Smith machine can be a nice way to add that in, to barbell loaded work across the shoulders, like a safety bar could be for a period of time.
Yeah.
But I'd be doing that with someone who's a super beginner, you're just learning, or a guy who's sort of like cycling maybe 2 or 3 key lifts, and we're just trying to kind of introduce something a little bit different for a period of time.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, I think this person's asking from just like an availability point
Yeah,
of view, like
yeah,
that's all they've got
better than
access
nothing.
to.
Better than a dumbbell for sure.
Yeah.
Dumbbell's good for learning, and then you're limited with loads. So Smith machine is also good. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. So we got someone else asking, what does like in season, what sort of like the frequency of your Bahrain riders strength training?
Typically in season, it's depending on whether it's a race week or a training week, but on average, it's 1 strength session a week. But then we do, depending on if they have kit at home or not, we'll do like tag on sessions. So if they go to, if they're like doing a sprints or a torque or a neuromuscular session, we might tag on strength before or after that. So it could be like 2 smaller sessions a week as well.
Yeah. Excellent. This person's asking about like posterior chain stuff
Yeah.
and how important you think that is
For cycling,
for
cyclists.
cycling.
Yeah,
Yeah.
quite important. I mean, there's like, just from a perspective of preventing knee injury, if you think about the number of knee extensions you do in the sport, and if you're particularly prone, that can be through stability, like what do your knee actually do in the pedal cycle, how much muscle mass have you got around your quad, and your glute, just what kind of build have you got. Sometimes just spending a bit of extra time on posterior chain is really beneficial. One, to the hip extension moment, like the bit where you're actually pushing down to the pedal, your glute and your quads contract at the same time, and there's a little bit of hip extension going on. So there's a little bit of performance benefit. But there's a large amount of just like synergy, you know, like the antagonistic approach of like your hamstrings or glutes assist your quads in producing force, and if they get really strong, they actually might take some work away from the quad when you're doing like climbing, seated work, because they're generating good amounts of force, and that ultimately is helping you with hip and knee extension. So it can be firstly just like a good injury prevention thing. If you're prone to knee pain over time, definitely work on your hamstring and glute strength. It can be good for stretch, like mobility perspective in terms of your pelvic rotation on the saddle or your available movement, your adaptability on the bike. If you do like hip hinging movements and, you know, RDLs and that kind of thing, it's really good. Good for generating core back strength for time on the bike if you're limited with your back strength. And as I said, it's like it also may contribute to hip extension and so cycling performance.
Excellent. Cool. So just one of my fun quick fire, I know you've not got much time, it's just one of my quick fire questions. What's your, like, one male and one female, your favorite cycling performance, you know, that you've seen like all time?
All time. Male would have
Yeah.
been Van Aert Roubaix this year. I think just,
Excellent.
yeah, mega. So good. Like just comeback story and just like physically all the things you'd love to see and you could imagine yourself doing, you know, in your wildest dreams. Female, I think seeing let me think about this. This is, oh, sorry, bear with me. I think female would have been um, Tokyo Olympics women's Madison, Katie Archibald and Laura Kenny winning gold.
Okay.
That was pretty cool.
Yeah. I think the Madison's a really crazy, stupid event, but yeah, they're both good riders and a gold medal is pretty cool. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, no, that was
Excellent.
mega. There's a lot of like team effort that went into that performance, like with the riders
Yeah.
themselves, all the staff, the coaches. Like it was a big team effort. It was just like such a, because it's Madison is quite an open. You know, it's not as like dialed in as Team Pursuit where
Yeah.
everything is kind of mapped out. But we really broke it all the way
So
down.
there's
Like
an opportunity there.
yeah,
Yeah.
even stuff like the bright yellow
Yeah.
helmets. It's such a simple thing, but made a big difference. And so yeah, it's a good one.
Amazing. Oh, so thank you so much for your time, Pete. And yeah, it's been a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Yeah, enjoyed it. It's fun. We'll have to do it again sometime. Maybe do
Yeah,
it
no.
we can do it more specific to like running and triathlon rather than just cycling. But
Yeah, no, I'd love that. Yeah, because there's obviously plenty more different topics to cover there. But yeah, that would be great. So stay in touch, guys, and maybe a running triathlon episode coming up in the next few months, weeks, years, who knows. Cheers.
yeah,
Okay.
nice.
Cheers, Pete.
Cheers.
Catch you later.
Bye.